The casserole dish slipped from Nadia's hands before she even registered what she was seeing. It hit the kitchen tile in 2 pieces, the ceramic cracking clean down the middle, and neither of them moved to clean it up. She just stood there in the doorway of their home, the one she'd helped pay for, the one she'd chosen the paint colors for, the one where she'd spent 11 years making a life, staring at the woman sitting at her kitchen island in Nadia's own robe, the ivory one, the one with her initials monogrammed on the pocket. The woman had a coffee mug in her hand. She looked up slowly like she'd been expecting this, like it was mildly inconvenient. And then Nadia heard footsteps on the stairs. Nadia. Her husband's voice, calm, almost rehearsed. "You're home early." That was what he said. Not "I'm sorry," not "let me explain." "You're home early." Like she was the one who'd done something wrong by walking into her own house on a Tuesday afternoon because she'd left the hospital during a break to surprise him with dinner before his business trip. His name was Elliot Marsh, 41 years old, cardiologist, her husband of 9 years, her partner of 11. The man she'd worked double shifts to support while he finished his fellowship. The man she'd moved to Charlotte for, leaving behind her mother, her sister, her entire support system, because he'd said Charlotte is where the opportunity is. Nadia. Trust me. She had trusted him. That was the thing. She had trusted him completely. The woman's name, she would learn later, was Courtney. She was 29, a pharmaceutical sales rep who visited Elliot's practice twice a month. She had the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had to fight for anything. And she didn't even look ashamed. She looked like she was waiting for Nadia to leave so she could finish her coffee. Nadia didn't cry. She wanted to, but the tears didn't come, not right away. What came instead was a strange cold clarity, like her body had shifted into a different mode entirely. She picked up her keys from the counter, walked back out the front door, sat in her car in the driveway and called her best friend Petra. "Come get me," she said. "I'll explain when you get here." Petra was there in 18 minutes. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later and Nadia almost missed what was buried in them. She'd been staying with Petra in a 2-bedroom apartment across town, sleeping on a pull-out couch that left a crease in her back every morning, going to work at Charlotte General where she was the head of the cardiac nursing division. A role she'd built over 8 years. A role that, by no small coincidence, had generated more than a few referrals for Elliot's practice over the years. She hadn't connected those dots for a long time. She was connecting them now. The papers were 43 pages. Her sister Renee, who was a paralegal back in Columbus, called to check on her the night the envelope arrived. "Don't sign anything yet," Renee said. "I mean it, don't even skim it. Send it to a real attorney first." "He said it was standard," Nadia told her. "He said it was just to start the process." There was a pause on the line. "Nadia, that's exactly what someone says when it's not standard." She hired a lawyer the next morning. A woman named Patricia Owens who had a quiet office downtown, and the kind of unhurried attention that Nadia feel, for the first time in months, that someone was actually in her corner. Patricia read through the papers carefully, flagged 17 items, and then set her pen down and looked across the desk. "He's asking you to waive your claim to the business partnership income from the last 4 years, she said. "Did you know he made you a silent partner in his private practice when he opened it?" Nadia hadn't known that. "There's also a clause here that would give him the house outright, citing it as his primary asset," Patricia continued. "But the down payment came from a joint account. We can contest this. How long will it take? Could be 6 months, could be a year." Patricia folded her hands. "But Nadia, I want to be very clear. He structured this specifically to push it through fast before you had time to look closely. If you'd signed this as written, you would have walked away with almost nothing." She drove back to Petra's apartment and sat in the parking lot for a long time before going inside. Not because she was falling apart, because something had clicked into place. Something quiet and steady and certain, and she needed a moment to let it settle. She wasn't going to let him do this to her. She had given that man 11 years. She had moved cities for him. She had held his hand through every anxiety before his boards, had covered his overhead during the lean months when the practice was new, had recommended his name to patients, to colleagues, to everyone who asked. She had made him. She was going to make sure the court understood that. She didn't know yet that Elliot had a problem with a colleague of his named Dr. Roman Sharp. Roman Sharp was 44, one of the most respected interventional cardiologists in the Southeast, and he ran a competing private practice across town that had, in the last 2 years, quietly become the preferred referral destination for Charlotte's top internists. Elliot hated him the way insecure people hate people who don't even notice them, deeply, personally, irrationally. Nadia had met Roman exactly once, briefly at a hospital gala 3 years ago. She remembered him as straightforward and unhurried, the kind of person who didn't perform warmth but actually had it. Elliot had maneuvered her away from the conversation within 4 minutes. She thought nothing of it at the time. She thought nothing of it until she ran into Roman in the hospital cafeteria on a Wednesday morning in February, 7 months after she'd found Courtney at her kitchen island. 4 months into the divorce proceedings that Elliot's attorneys were now dragging out as long as possible out of spite. Roman was reading something on his phone, standing in the coffee line. He looked up when she appeared beside him. "Nadia Marr," she said, then paused. "Sorry, I don't know if that's Nadia Cole," she said. She'd gone back to her maiden name 3 months ago. It had felt, the moment she did it, like setting down a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Roman nodded once. "Roman Sharp. We met at the gala a few years ago briefly." He held out his hand. "I should probably tell you that I'm familiar with your work. You reorganized the cardiac nursing protocols here about 4 years ago. I refer patients here partly because of those protocols." It was the most professional compliment anyone had given her in years. She didn't know what to do with it. They ended up getting coffee at the same table because the cafeteria was crowded, and she didn't have the energy to navigate an awkward departure. They talked for 20 minutes. He was easy to talk to in the way that people are when they're genuinely interested in what you're saying, rather than just waiting for their turn to speak. He asked about the protocol changes. She found herself explaining the logic behind them, the resistance she'd faced from administration, the way she'd pushed through anyway. "You should write that up," he said. "Seriously, that's publishable." She laughed. She hadn't laughed in months. It surprised her. They ran into each other again the following week, and the week after that, and somewhere around the 6th time it stopped being coincidence, and started being the thing they were both quietly choosing without saying so out loud. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in April. Patricia had fought for 8 months. She had documented every joint account contribution, every referral Nadia had sent to Elliot's practice. Every piece of evidence that the life Elliot had been built partly on Nadia's foundation. The court had listened. The ruling gave Nadia her fair share of the home equity, a portion of the practice income from the years of their marriage, and restitution for the waived partnership clause. Elliot had tried to slip past her. Elliot had sat across the courtroom looking like a man who couldn't believe this was happening to him, like he'd genuinely expected her to just sign what he put in front of her and disappear quietly. He'd said through his attorney that he hoped they could be civil. Nadia had said nothing. There was nothing to say. She went to dinner with Petra and Renee that night. Renee had flown in from Columbus. They ordered too much food and stayed until the restaurant was half empty, and Nadia felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief exactly, but possibility. Like a window that had been painted shut for years had finally been forced open, and the air coming through was cold and clean and real. She didn't tell anyone about Roman yet. It was still new, still careful, still the kind of thing that only exists fully in private before the world gets its hands on it. But she knew. She'd known for a while. Elliot found out on a Sunday. She couldn't have engineered it better if she'd tried, and she hadn't tried at all. That was the part that would bother him most, she suspected. He saw them at the farmer's market downtown. Nadia and Roman, walking close, his hand at the small of her back, buying tomatoes from the same vendor she and Elliot had bought tomatoes from for years. She didn't see Elliot until they were already past him. She heard about it through Petra, who heard about it through someone in Elliot's circle. He'd called 3 mutual acquaintances within the hour. He had gone apparently completely sideways. "Roman Sharp?" Elliot had reportedly said, his voice climbing to a register Petra described as almost unrecognizable. "She's with Roman Sharp?" It would have been funny if it weren't also exactly predictable. He hadn't wanted her. He'd had Courtney. He'd moved Courtney into the house, her house, within 2 months of the separation. But the idea of Nadia with someone, and specifically someone like Roman, someone Elliot had spent years resenting from a distance, that apparently he could not process. He called her. She didn't answer. He called again. She sent it to voicemail and didn't listen to the message until 2 days later. "I just want to understand," his voice said. "I want to understand how this happened. I thought you needed time. I thought you were figuring yourself out. I didn't think you were." A pause. "He's not who you think he is, Nadia. I know things about his practice. I know things about him. You should be careful." She deleted it without responding. Patricia had warned her, "Don't engage. If he becomes threatening or continues to contact you, document it. Otherwise, silence is the only answer worth giving." She was very good at silence now. She had learned it in the months after she found Courtney. She had learned that the things people say when they are unraveling are meant to pull you into the unraveling with them, and the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to step back and let it happen without you. Elliot's second call came a week later. Then a third. She documented all of them. What she hadn't expected was for him to show up. It was a Saturday morning in late May. She'd just moved into her own apartment, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor with big windows and a view of the park and a kitchen that was entirely hers. Not a single thing chosen by committee or compromise. She'd spent the week unpacking slowly and deliberately, placing things where she wanted them, leaving space where she wanted space. It had felt like an act of reconstruction. She was carrying a box of books from her car when she saw Elliot standing on the sidewalk out front. He looked bad. She registered that clinically, the way she might assess a patient. Pale, jaw tight, a restless energy in his hands that she didn't remember from before. He was wearing a shirt she recognized, one she'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, and there was something about that detail that made her feel briefly sad. Not for him. For the version of herself who'd given it to him. "I just need 5 minutes," he said. "No, Nadia, please." He took a step toward her. "I know I don't have any right to ask, I know that. But I need you to understand that I didn't plan for any of this to happen the way it did. Courtney is," he stopped. "She's gone, she left 3 weeks ago." Nadia set the box down on the hood of her car. She looked at him carefully. She had known him for 11 years. She could read the specific frequency of his distress the way she could read a monitor, and what she was reading now was not remorse, not exactly. It was panic. The specific panic of a man who had made a series of calculations that were not working out the way he'd expected. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said in the voice she used when she meant the opposite. "Roman Sharp is using you," Elliot said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "I know how he operates. He's building his reputation at the expense of..." "Elliot." She picked the box back up. "You don't get to do this. You ended our marriage. You tried to cheat me out of what I was owed. You had a woman in our home before the papers were even filed." She looked at him steadily. "Whatever is happening in your life right now is not my responsibility. He stopped himself. "Don't," she said quietly. She carried the box inside and didn't look back. She told Roman about it that evening over the phone. He was quiet while she talked and then he said, "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said, and she meant it. "Do you want me to come over?" She looked around the apartment, the half-unpacked shelves, the new rug she'd rolled out that morning, the plant Petra had given her as a housewarming gift sitting in the window, already angling toward the light. "Yeah," she said. "Bring food. I have nothing in the fridge." He laughed. She laughed. It was so easy and she'd forgotten that it could be easy and she thought she might cry a little after she hung up, not from sadness but from the specific gratitude of being reminded that you deserve things to be easy. The news about Elliot's practice came 6 weeks later. She heard it from Patricia, who still kept her ear to the ground in the legal circles adjacent to medicine. A former staff member had filed a complaint with the state medical board. Improper billing practices, inflated procedure codes, insurance fraud. The inquiry had been opened quietly, but these things move fast once they start. 2 of Elliot's largest referring physicians had already distanced themselves. His patient volume had dropped by a third. Nadia sat with that information for a moment. She didn't feel triumphant exactly. She felt something quieter than that. She felt like the world had simply run the math and arrived at the correct answer without anyone having to intervene. She called Patricia back. "Does this affect anything on my end?" "No," Patricia said. "Your settlement was finalized months ago." "You're clear?" "Okay," Nadia said. "Thank you for letting me know." She went back to work. Roman asked her to dinner at a place she'd never been to. A small restaurant in Plaza Midwood that his colleague had recommended, the kind of place with 12 tables and a menu that changed weekly. They sat in a corner booth and talked for 3 hours about nothing important and everything that mattered. He told her about his residency in Pittsburgh, the winter he'd almost quit, the patient who'd changed his mind. She told him about her mother's kitchen in Columbus, the way she'd learned to read people by watching her mother manage a household of 4 kids on a nurse's salary, the fact that nursing had never felt like a fallback to her. It had always felt like the exact right thing. "You're good at it," he said. He wasn't flattering her. He said it the way you state a fact. "I know," she said, and she'd learned finally not to deflect that. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was a small gesture, unhurried, and she thought about all the years she'd spent trying to earn that kind of steadiness from someone who didn't have it to give, and how strange it was that the thing you needed had sometimes been waiting just past the edge of the wrong life. She heard about Elliot one final time, through a mutual acquaintance, at a hospital fundraiser in October. The state board had suspended his license pending the fraud investigation. The practice had been placed under administrative review. He'd let the house she'd helped buy, the one she'd painted and furnished and poured herself into, fall 2 months behind on the mortgage because Courtney had left and his income had collapsed and the weight of what he'd built on shortcuts had finally exceeded what the structure could hold. The acquaintance told her this in the way that people sometimes do, half cautiously, watching for a reaction. Nadia nodded and said, "I hope he finds a good attorney," and moved on to the next conversation. Roman found her 20 minutes later across the room, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one without a word. They stood together for a moment, watching the room, and she thought about where she'd been a year ago. The casserole dish in 2 pieces on the tile, Courtney at the kitchen island, the cold clean shock of a world that had rearranged itself without warning. She thought about who she'd been then, and she thought about who she was now, standing in this room with good wine and a man who had never once made her feel like a consolation prize, and a career she'd built herself on her own terms out of her own capability. She took a sip of the wine. "Ready to go?" Roman asked. "Almost," she said. "Give me 5 more minutes, I want to say hello to the chief of staff." He smiled. "Take your time," and she did. She moved through the room deliberately, speaking to the people she wanted to speak to, staying for exactly as long as she chose, carrying herself like someone who had earned the right to take up space. Because she had. She always had. She'd just stopped acting like it for a while. That was the part she would never let happen again.